Shalom HaDavar. Welcome to our next session in the book of Isaiah. We're in session number 26. We're working our way through the book of Isaiah using Ariel Ministries exegetical outline notes as our foundation. These notes are created by Dr. Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum. All right, let's take a look at our previous session. Let's review it quickly. Last session we were in the tribulation period in chapter 33, verses 7 through 9. We saw that Lebanon, Sharon, Bashan, and Carmel would all recover and be productive after the invasions of the tribulation period. From the tribulation, we then move to the second coming in verses 10 through 12, back to the tribulation in verses 13 through 16, and there I noted that there are four groups of Jewish people to be found during the tribulation period. There would be the unbelieving majority, which makes up 2/3 of the nation, the 144,000 evangelists, other Messianic Jews, and finally the faithful remnant, which makes up 1/3 of the nation. The faithful remnant will be hiding out in Basra or Petra, located in the Mount Seir mountain range. And here's a photograph, a little snippet of the Mount Seir mountain range, a very high, mountainous, and rocky wilderness. This exactly fits the description of the place of refuge in the Scriptures. From the tribulation, we then move to the kingdom in verse 17. There we learn that the Jewish people would see the king in all his beauty, in his Shekinah glory beauty. And in addition, they would see an extended land, the land of Israel. The borders of Israel will be extended to completely cover the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Another feature of the millennium, the Messianic kingdom that we noted, was the millennial river, the Messianic river. It will come from the temple, it'll flow eastward, then turn south to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, it will break into two major branches, one major branch going to the Mediterranean Sea, and the other major branch going to the east down to the Dead Sea. And of course, there will be other canals in Jerusalem as well. Jerusalem will be noted for its rivers and canals. However, Jerusalem's enemies will never be seen again. They will not be floating on the canals and rivers of Jerusalem. They are a sinking ship going down for the last time, destroyed by the tribulation period. From the tribulation, we then move to the second coming in chapter 34, and we reviewed the campaign of Armageddon. Again, really quickly, the first stage of the campaign is the Antichrist armies assembling at Armageddon, at Har Megiddo. That's in the Jezreel Valley. All the nations of the world will send men and materiel to the Jezreel Valley to support the Antichrist army. Babylon will be the religious, political, and economic capital of the world, the Antichrist's capital at that time. And the Antichrist will then join his troops, stage number 2. He leaves his capital and goes to the Jezreel Valley, to Megiddo. This sets up the third stage of the campaign of Armageddon, the destruction of Babylon, which is also the first battle of the campaign. We learn from Jeremiah 51, verses 27 and 28, that the kingdoms of Ararat, Mini, Ashkenaz, all unite together with the kingdoms of the Medes to come against Babylon from the north in a surprise attack. They do not go and support the Antichrist army at Megiddo. They come against Babylon, and Babylon is destroyed quickly and violently in the manner that which Scripture demands. Babylon is destroyed. The Antichrist capital is destroyed. This brings us to the fourth stage of the campaign of Armageddon, the fall of Jerusalem. This is the second battle of the campaign. The Antichrist does not defend his capital. Instead, he sends his troops against the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. His major aim, like the Nazis in World War II, his major aim becomes the destruction of the Jewish people. That brings on the fifth stage of the campaign of Armageddon, the tribulation Holocaust and the Jewish flight to Basra, those who survive the battle at Jerusalem. There's a tremendous battle at Jerusalem, but Jerusalem does fall in the fourth stage. And so in the fifth stage, those that survive the battle flee to Basra or Petra in Edom. This brings on the sixth stage. The armies of the Antichrist then besiege Basra. the armies move south. They set up a siege around Bozrah in order to destroy this most important segment of the faithful remnant. This brings us to the seventh stage, the national regeneration of Israel. At the end of the tribulation period, the Jewish people from all over the world, and especially those in Bozrah, start to call out to Yeshua to return. We plead with him to return and save us, and he responds. That brings us to the eighth stage of the campaign, the second coming of Messiah. Messiah responds, but the initial point of the second coming will be Bozrah or Petra, where he will save the tents of Judah first. Then he will tread the winepress, which is the third battle of the campaign of Armageddon. Now the field of battle can be determined from Joel 2:20 and Habakkuk 3:3. It is this red dotted line. So Messiah will leave Bozrah. He'll tread the winepress to Teman through the wilderness of Paran, destroying the Antichrist armies in the Negev, pushing them into the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, and approaching Jerusalem from the south. That is the winepress of the wrath of God Almighty. The fighting will end in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. That's stage number 10. Many people think the Kidron here is the Valley of Jehoshaphat. I don't personally think so, but nevertheless, the Jesus, the returning Messiah, will destroy the Antichrist armies and finish up the fighting in the Valley of the Kidron. He will then make a victory ascent up the Mount of Olives, and this is the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. The victory ascent will bring the campaign of Armageddon to a close. And if you'd like more information about this, I recommend very highly the book Footsteps of the Messiah by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, available from Ariel Ministries and from Amazon.com. You'll get more details about the campaign of Armageddon and much more in the book Footsteps of the Messiah, the revised edition. All right, that brings us now to our new material. We've looked at the destruction of the nations in verses 1 through 4 of chapter 34. And we've looked at the place of the destruction of all the nations in chapter 34, verses 5 through 7. That's Edom, the city of Bozrah. And now we come to the cause for the destruction of the nations in verse 8. Chapter 34, verse 8, For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a day of recompense for the cause of Zion. So many modern theologians don't like this idea of vengeance and recompense. They consider it sub-Christian or something like that. But you know, God cannot be true to his character of holiness if he allows sin and rebellion to go unpunished. If someone came into your house and in cold blood murdered your wife, murdered your husband, murdered your son, murdered your daughter, something like that, would it be a good judge when he stood before the judge, would it be a good judge who would just dismiss the charges and forget about them? No. Crime deserves punishment. God is righteous. God is just. And he wouldn't be holy if he allowed sin and rebellion to go unpunished. So he will have a day of vengeance. He will have a year of recompense. And all these words are in the plural in the Hebrew. They emphasize the intensity of the statement. God is absolutely determined to bring justice to this world. So the vengeance and the recompense are for the cause of Zion. Now this means that all indignities against Israel will be avenged. For Israel's vengeance, all the armies of all the nations will be destroyed. And for Israel's recompense, Edom will become a burning wasteland. So now we turn our attention to the results on Edom during the kingdom period. We move from the second coming into the kingdom. What will Edom be like in the kingdom? We read in verses 9 and 10 that it will be a perpetual desolation. Its streams will be turned into pitch, and its loose earth into brimstone, and its land will become burning pitch. It will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation, it will be desolate. None will pass through it forever and ever. So we have a picture here of this continual burning wasteland. Now the translation in the NASB, forever and ever, is a little too strong. The Hebrew is le'olam. Le'olam basically means to the end of an age. So we're looking here at the kingdom age, the 1,000 years of the Messianic kingdom. So throughout that 1,000-year period, Edom will be a burning wasteland. Just like Babylon is. You know, there'll be two burning wastelands in the Messianic kingdom. Here, Edom is one of the burning wastelands. And back in chapter 13, we learned that Babylon would also be one of the burning wastelands. Both of these places will be the prisons of demons. And here is a map of the modern Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. And again, the location of Edom here is southern Jordan today, southern Jordan. Okay, verses 9 and 10 said there would be no human inhabitants of Edom, but there will be inhabitants. And so the inhabitants are named in verse 11. They're not human inhabitants, but pelican and hedgehog will possess it, and owl and raven will dwell in it. Well, the names of these animals are guesswork. The translators have put names there in regard to the Hebrew words, but we're not sure exactly what these animals are. So we need to ask a question. Can an animal live in this kind of a burning wasteland, this kind of an environment? Well, we'll get our answer in just a few verses. But remember that question. What kind of creatures can live in a burning wasteland? Can a pelican, NASB uses the word pelican there, can a seabird live inland, and not only inland, but in a burning wasteland? Think about that. Stay tuned for the answer in just a few minutes. In verse 11, we see that this is a divine judgment, and he will stretch over it the line of desolation and the plumb line of emptiness. So confusion and emptiness and desolation characterize the land of Edom. And the Hebrew words here are the same words used in Genesis 1:2. Tohu vabohu. There the earth was formless and void, confused and empty. So that's the nature of the land of Edom. We also learn in verse 12 that Edom's government will disappear. Its nobles, there's no one there whom they may proclaim king, and all its princes will be nothing. So that's very consistent with the destruction of Edom. There's no governmental entity there in that region, in that burning wasteland. So the state of the government has been described, the state of the nation has been described. Now the state of the cities is described as a place of thorns and thistles. Verse 13. Thorns will come up in its fortified towers, nettles and thistles in its fortified cities. So the cities of Edom are abandoned and destroyed. And now we come to a description of the inhabitants of Edom. You've been waiting for this. It will also be the haunt of jackals and an abode of ostriches. The desert creatures will meet there with the wolves. The hairy goat also will cry to its kind. Yes, the night monster will settle there and find herself a resting place. All right, and the animals are again named. In verse 15, it continues. The tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there, and will hatch and gather them under its protection. Yes, the hawks will be gathered there, every one with its kind. So the translators have supplied names for us, but again, most of these names are guesswork. We really don't know what these animals are. We need to ask that question again. Can these animals that we know of today in our environment, our regular environment, can animals like this live in a burning wasteland that Edom will become? The answer is really found in verse 14. The desert creatures will meet with the wolves. The hairy goat will cry to its kind. Yes, the night monster will settle there and find herself a resting place. Well, the words translated hairy goat are very clear. The words hairy goat means demons in goat form. And the word night monster is the word Lilith, which means the night demon. So these words describe demons in animal forms, and demons can inhabit an environment of burning pitch. So that will be the inhabitants of Edom. Demons, it will be one of the prisons for the demons. It's the same problem we faced in Isaiah 13, Remember in Isaiah 13, how can these animals live in a burning wasteland in Babylon? And we learn that shaggy goats speak of satyrs, demons. And here in Isaiah 34, the hairy goat, again, speaks of satyrs or demons, and the night monster speaks of Lilith, the night demon. So Edom will be the prison house of demons during the kingdom, as will Babylon. In verses 16 and 17, the affirmation of the truth of all this will be brought forth. God says that every prophecy will have its fulfillment. In verse 16, seek from the book of the Lord and read. Not one of these will be missing. None will lack its mate. So the book of the Lord is the prophetic word. The word seek there means encourages the reader to lean over the book carefully and search it diligently. No prophecy will be missing, and no prophecy will lack its fulfillment. And the proof or the affirmation of this is in the second part of verse 16. Verse 16b. Here we go. For his mouth has commanded, and his spirit has gathered them. For the mouth of the Lord commanded it, the Holy Spirit will carry it out. In verse 17, we learn that Israel's future has been carefully planned. He has cast the lot for them, and his hand has divided it to them by line. They shall possess it forever. From generation to generation they will dwell in it. So this term, lot and line, is a figure of speech that shows careful planning. And the result of God's careful planning, the land will be Israel's possession perpetually. And the term here is adolam, which is a Hebrew construction that does mean forever. Now, verse 17 is a transition verse. The subject now taken up is the restoration of Israel as we move into chapter 35. So remember, we're still in the kingdom as we enter chapter 35, verse 1. And as we look at the transformation of Israel, the first subject that comes into view is the transformation of the land. And two areas of the land are highlighted in chapter 1. The wilderness and the desert will be glad. The Arabah will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. Now the Negev desert will be glad. The Negev desert is the area to the south of Israel, the southern part of Israel. It will be glad. And here's a picture of the Negev today. It is a desolate and dry and unproductive land today. And the Arabah is the Rift Valley between the Dead and Red Seas. And the Arabah will blossom. Here's the Arabah today. Again, both of these areas are very dry and very unproductive, but in the kingdom they will be glad, they will blossom with produce. Now, what the Arabah will receive is brought out in verse 2. It will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and the shout of joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it. The majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. So what will the Arabah receive? The glory of Lebanon. That's trees. Trees will grow there. The excellency of Carmel. That's Carmel's beauty. The excellency of Sharon. That is her productivity. And then she will also receive the glory of the Lord. That's a Shekinah glory light. And the majesty of God. That is his personal presence in the form of Jesus the Messiah. And the cause of all this will be the second coming. So we change our time frames from the kingdom back to the prelude to the kingdom, which is the second coming in verses 3 and 4. Now we learn in verses 3 and 4 that Israel will be in need of comfort during the tribulation period. So God says to Isaiah, encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those with anxious heart, take courage, fear not. So that's a description of Israel's need during the tribulation. Exhausted, feeble, anxious, afraid, on the verge of annihilation by the Antichrist's armies. But then we view the second coming in verse 4. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. The recompense of God will come, but he will save you. So God will come with recompense and vengeance is stated one more time. Vengeance means that he will mete out proper justice, and recompense means you get what you deserve, whether it be reward or punishment. And so the armies of the Antichrist will be destroyed, and the Jewish people will be saved. He's coming to save Israel, and that salvation is both physical and spiritual in sense. Physical and spiritual rescue will be experienced by the Jewish people. Now we change time frames again as we see the results. We move from the second coming to the kingdom. As we're back in the kingdom, we look at the results of the second coming. First of all, the results upon the people, upon the Jewish people, and this is healing of all infirmities in verses 5 and 6. Then, see, after the second coming, then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. So there's going to be all kinds of healings here. The blind will see, that's visual healing. The deaf will hear, that's auditory healing. The lame will walk, that's ambulatory healing. And the dumb or the mute will talk, that's verbal healing. Everybody's going to receive healings for their infirmities, no matter what they are. These are representative of the major infirmities that mankind suffer. But this healing is always the result when the king is present. Always the result. For example, in Matthew 11 and Matthew 15, Matthew 11, 4 through 6, Yeshua answered and said to them, "Go and report to John what you hear and see." See, John wanted to know if he was the genuine Messiah. So Yeshua told him that the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. See, that's the situation when the king is present. That's the situation when the Messiah is present. Healings of all infirmities occur, just like Isaiah states. Then in Matthew 15, 29 to 31, departing from there, Yeshua went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up on the mountain, he was sitting there. And large crowds came to him, bringing with them those who were lame, crippled, blind, mute, and many others, and they laid him down at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd marveled as they saw the mute speaking, the cripple restored, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. So again, when the king is present, healings of his subjects occurs. So that's the first result, the result upon the people. The second result of the second coming is the result upon the land, which will be an abundance of water. That's a big need in Israel. For waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the Arabah. The scorched land will become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, its resting place, grass becomes reeds and rushes. And so waters are going to break out. Waters are going to break out in the Negev. You see, the Negev is not a sandy desert. The Negev has good soil. The problem is lack of water. There's the western Negev after it's been raining. Look at that. It blossoms and bursts forth with vegetation because the land is good. The soil is good. It just needs water. There's your western Negev. In the Arabah will have streams in the Arabah. The same problem. Now here's the Arabah, and you see that this farmer is growing date palms. These are young date palms, and they're being irrigated. All they need is water. The soil is good soil. In the kingdom, there will be no need for irrigation systems like this. God will see to that. So the ground will produce real pools of water. The mirage will become a reality. And reeds and rushes will grow in a formerly barren land. It'll be so wet and soft and fertile that reeds and rushes will grow where only grass managed to struggle for a living. So that's the results on the people and the land. Next we see, and we get a glance at the highway of holiness in verses 8 through 10. The way of holiness is proclaimed in verse 8. A highway will be there, a roadway, and it will be called the highway of holiness. And the name in Hebrew is the Derech HaKodesh, the Derech HaKodesh, the way of holiness. It'll travel through the desert, which is now in bloom. Then the travelers on this highway are described in verses 8 and 9. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for him who walks that way, and fools will not wander on it. No lion will be there, nor will any vicious beast go up on it. These will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there. And so there are eligible and ineligible travelers on the way of holiness. Those who are eligible to walk the way of holiness are the wayfarer. That's a person traveling to Jerusalem. That's just a generic term for somebody traveling to Jerusalem. And the redeemed, the believer, those going up to worship the Lord, and those who are trusting in Him are eligible to walk on the way of holiness. But there are ineligible people that will not be allowed to walk on it, and these are the immoral people and the dangerous. See, the unclean is the morally disqualified. The fool is the irreligious. And then there's a mention of the hungry animals, the lion and the ravenous beast. You see, in Isaiah's day, hungry animals made travel dangerous, but that danger will not exist in the kingdom. Remember, we saw that in Isaiah 11:6, the peaceable kingdom, the lion and the lamb lying down together. We'll see this also in Isaiah 65, verse 25. And now the manner of the return is brought out in verse 10. And the ransomed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion, with everlasting joy upon their heads. And they will find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Now the Midrash Rabbah states that this is a description of the Messianic times. And here is the Midrash Rabbah. But in the Messianic age there will no longer be any troubles. For it says, referring to Scripture of course, Isaiah, because the former troubles are forgotten, and then they shall obtain gladness and joy. And there's our verse that they're quoting, Isaiah 35, verse 10. So we agree with the rabbis. This speaks of the Messianic age. So the ransomed of the Lord will return. This is the Jewish and Gentile saints coming to the festivals of the Lord. They will come to Zion with singing. That's their human expression of praise and blessing. And then there's going to be two blessings that those coming to Zion will receive. They'll receive positive blessings and they'll receive negative blessings. The positive blessing speaks of what they will be receiving. They'll receive gladness and joy. The negative blessings, what they will lose. They will lose sorrow and sighing. Won't that be nice? You know, these days we lose something and we're usually probably upset about it. But in those days in the kingdom, we're going to lose sorrow and sighing. We're going to be so happy to say goodbye to tears and sorrow. We'll never experience that again. That will be a blessing, something to lose. Little different than our world today. So chapter 35 ends with a summary statement, combining together the prophecies that Israel will be redeemed, Israel will be regathered, Israel will experience much millennial blessing of joy and peace. And of course, these millennial blessings will be experienced worldwide because Yeshua the Messiah King will be ruling the entire world from Israel, from Jerusalem. But it's a time that I yearn to experience. I get tired many times in this world of the sorrow and sighing I have to experience. We all have to experience. All right, let's do a little bit of a drash right now, a little bit of an application. And I thought I'd do a little bit of a different application. I would just encourage us during our prayer times. First of all, in your prayer time, praise God for the millennial kingdom, the fact that that promise lays out there in front of us. And praise God for the fact that we will personally experience its blessings, the blessings of the Messianic kingdom. It's going to be a wonderful time. Secondly, I want you to praise God for the blessing aspect of the kingdom that is most meaningful to you. You know, we've looked at a number of characteristics of the kingdom, and we'll list some more in just a moment. Thank God for the one that really hits home to you, that's most meaningful to you. Not only thank Him generically, but thank Him specifically for that blessing. And thirdly, pray also for Israel during the tribulation. Pray the Bible back to God. Your kingdom come. Pray that all we've learned about in this lesson will come to pass. All right, I was telling you to pray for certain features of the kingdom. Let's take a look at some more features of the kingdom that we have discovered. The 47th feature, the personal presence of Yeshua in his glory. 48th feature, the boundaries of the promised land expanded to include all the land promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. All the enemies of the Jewish people will be gone. Number 50, millennial feasts will be celebrated in Jerusalem. That'll be a good time. Number 51, Jerusalem will be characterized by quietness, confidence, and peace. Very different from the nation today, where we're always concerned about security. Number 52, Jerusalem will be transformed with 2 rivers and multiple canals. That'll be a big switch. That'll be neat to see. Yeshua will serve as judge, legislator, and executive in the good government. Finally, we'll be living under the type of government we're built for, theocracy, by our good and righteous King. Number 54, no resident in Jerusalem will suffer from physical or spiritual sickness. Everyone will be healthy inside and out. 55, Edom will be a perpetual desolation, a burning wilderness, a prison of demons. That's one of the reasons why the kingdom will be so wonderful. The demons will be confined and not be able to support their mentor Satan. Number 56, the Negev and the Arabah will be transformed and productive. From north to south, Israel will blossom. 57, the people will be healed of all infirmities. 58, the desert areas will be well watered. 59, the highway of holiness will be functioning. 60, the return of the Jewish people from the diaspora will be accompanied with singing, joy, and gladness. So those are a lot of features we can thank the Lord for. Of those 60 features. 60, is that what I noted? Let me back up here. Yes, of those 60 features, pick the one that means the most to you and thank him specifically for that, as well as for the generic beauty and wonder of the Messianic kingdom. All right, we're going to move now to chapter 36, and as we do, we encounter the historical interlude concerning the crisis of the 14th year of Hezekiah. Remember that? We're going to get back to that. Chapters 28 through 35 concern the prophecies that resulted from this crisis, but in these verses, the verses to come, the chapters to come, we'll study the historical crisis itself. Now, interesting, up to this point, the book of Isaiah has been poetry, but in verses, or should say chapters 36 through 39, it's all in Hebrew prose. We move into a bit of history here, and in chapter 40 we start poetry again. So this is a very different section of the book of Isaiah. If you want to study this section in more detail, there are parallel passages, 2 Kings 18:13 through 20:21, and 2 Chronicles 32 verses 1 through 31. Those are parallel passages to this crisis in the 14th year of Hezekiah. So in this section, we'll see the fulfillment of many prophecies found in Isaiah chapter 1 through chapter 35. These fulfillments will prove that Isaiah's authority to be God's prophet. They'll prove that Isaiah is a genuine prophet, not a false prophet. He'll pass the test of a prophet in flying colors. And this is also a transition from the Assyrian to the Babylonian period. Isaiah 40 through 66 will concern the Babylonian domination rather than the Assyrian domination. So let's turn to Hezekiah and the Syrians in chapter 36:1 through 37:38, and we're going to change time frames from the kingdom in chapter 35. We're going to jump all the way back to the prophet's present time in chapter 36, verse 1, and here we encounter the invasion of Sennacherib. Verse 1. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. Okay, so Judah has been under the Assyrian yoke ever since Ahaz's disobedience to the prophecy of Isaiah back in chapter 7, way back in chapter 7. And they've been under the Assyrian yoke up to the 14th year of Hezekiah. Hezekiah took the throne and ruled for 14 years and was a vassal to Assyria. In the beginning, Hezekiah was subservient to Assyria during the beginning of his reign. However, in Hezekiah's government, there was a strong pro-Egyptian force pushing for an alliance with Egypt against Assyria. This force, this party, was opposed by Isaiah, and that's the background of Isaiah chapter 28 through 35. Now, as we get into chapter 36 through 39, I want to share with you right now a short summary of the chapters from a commentary. I thought this summary was quite short and quite straightforward. So the New Geneva Study Bible sums up these chapters with these words. Chapters 36 through 39 relay the events of 701 BC, when Assyria tried to conquer Judah. After Sargon II died in 705 BC, a rebellion took place early in the reign of Sennacherib. The entire Assyrian Empire was involved. Merodach Baladan of Babylon in the eastern end of the Fertile Crescent, and Shabako of Egypt in the western end of the crescent were the chief troublemakers. Hezekiah joined the rebellion when the pro-Egyptian party ascended in Judah. They thought joining Egypt there in the rebellion was a good idea. Sennacherib marched westward to quiet the rebels after spending time in the east for the same purpose. So he quieted everything in the eastern end of the empire. Now he heads for the western end of the empire. Phoenicia is taken, and the lesser powers fell. Philistia, Egypt were laid waste. Judah was ravaged in preparation for Sennacherib's siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC. The city was miraculously delivered when the Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's chief officer, delivered the ultimatum to surrender. So that's a good summary of where we're going. And the point right now is that the Assyrians are coming. And so Judah, Jerusalem, Hezekiah need to make preparations for the siege. And that's described in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles, let's take a look here, 32:30. He's going to build the water tunnel for the spring of Gihon to the pool of Siloam. 2 Chronicles 32:30. It was Hezekiah who stopped the outlet of the waters of Gihon, and directed them to the west side of the city of David. And Hezekiah prospered in all that he did. So he's the one who built the water tower. Now this tunnel was discovered by archaeologists, and if you visit Jerusalem, you can see that tunnel today. Here is a map of Hezekiah's tunnel. You can see I'm highlighting it there. It goes underneath the city of David. So there's Hezekiah. Here's another map, probably a little bit better one. It starts from the Gihon Spring here and goes underneath the city of David, comes out at the pool of Siloam over here. It's underneath the city of David, about 300 feet down from the top of the city of David. Solid rock that they had to tunnel through. And here's some photographs from the inside of the tunnel. You see it still carries water even today. And you can walk that tunnel if you want to. Many, many people walk through it. This inscription was found on the wall of the tunnel describing how it was constructed. And this is a picture of the meeting point, and we can read about that from that inscription. That inscription reads, "The tunnel was being dug out. It was cut in the following manner, with axes, each man towards his fellow. And while there were still 3 cubits to be cut through, the voice of one man calling to the other was heard, showing that he was deviating to the right. When the tunnel was driven through, the excavators met man to man, axe to axe, and the water flowed for 1,200 cubits from the spring to the reservoir. The height of the rock above the heads of the excavators was about 100 cubits. Wow. Isn't that amazing, you guys? And there's the meeting point. They had to do a little bit of a jog to get the tunnel to line up, but they met finally, and the water could flow through the tunnel. Amazing bit of engineering. All right, so that's the water tunnel, the first one of the major preparations for the siege. And the stopping up of the outside water supply, a second major preparation in 2 Chronicles 32, 1 through 5. So after these, and he's speaking of Hezekiah's acts of faithfulness in serving the Lord, after these acts of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah and besieged the fortified cities. And he thought to break into them for himself. Now when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come, and that he intended to make war on Jerusalem, he decided with his officers and his warriors to cut off the supply of water from the springs which are outside the city. And they helped him. So it's a second bit of preparation they take. So many people assembled and stopped up all the springs and the stream which flowed through the region, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find abundant water?" And so Jerusalem had abundant water because of the tunnel that Hezekiah had built. And the water was inside the city. So they not only built the water tunnel and stopped up the outside water supply, but they fortified the walls and stocked the armory. 2 Chronicles 32. And he took courage and rebuilt all the wall that had been broken down, and erected towers on it, and built another outside wall, and strengthened the Millo in the city of David, and made weapons and shields in great number. So now they're ready. They're ready for Sennacherib. So the invasion comes in 701. The new king after Sargon II is now Sennacherib, and he defeats the Egyptians on the plains of El-Tekah. So here's Sennacherib's invasion. He comes down the coast from the north. The Egyptians come up from the south. They meet on the plain of El-Tekah, and a tremendous battle ensues, of which the Egyptians are defeated. They head for home. And then the army of Sennacherib splits into two arms. The northern arm prevents any relief from the west to come to Jerusalem, and from the north. They cut off all possible aid from the west and from the north. And then the other part of the army starts to ravage Judah. They move in against the Judean cities of the Shephelah and into the interior. Now, when this happens, Hezekiah sues for peace while Sennacherib is at Lachish. He sues for peace, and Hezekiah then has to pay heavy tribute. And this is brought out in 2 Kings 18, verses 13 through 16. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. There's that southern arm of the Assyrian army doing its job. Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, "I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear." So the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah gave him all the silver which was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So Hezekiah pays this very, very heavy tribute. But Sennacherib breaks his promises, and he next demands the surrender and deportation of Jerusalem. He has just stepped one step beyond what God will permit. We look in the Assyrian, Egyptian, and biblical records, and they all agree on something. They all agree. Something happened in the campaign against Jerusalem, and it was incomplete. Jerusalem was besieged, but she was never taken. Now we can read Sennacherib's account of what happened. Now remember, Assyrian kings were not in the business of admitting their failures. If they failed, they would word it in such a way, they would word the explanation in such a way that you wouldn't know they had failed. So here it goes. This is the clay prism of Sennacherib. And let's read. On the 6 inscribed sides of this clay prism, King Sennacherib recorded 8 military campaigns undertaken against various peoples who refused to submit to Assyrian domination. In all instances, he claims to have been victorious. As part of the 3rd campaign, he besieged Jerusalem and imposed heavy tribute on Hezekiah, king of Judah, a story also related in the Bible, where Sennacherib is said to have been defeated by the angel of the Lord, who slew 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, 2 Kings 18 and 19. Now, when we read Sennacherib's prism, this is what we read. As for the king of Judah, Hezekiah, so this is mentioned in his name is mentioned in an extra biblical text here. As for the king of Judah, Hezekiah, who had not submitted to my authority, I besieged and captured 46 of his fortified cities, along with many smaller towns, taken in battle with my battering rams. I took as plunder 200,150 people, both small and great, male and female, along with a great number of animals, including horses and mules and donkeys and camels and oxen and sheep. As for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. Then I constructed a series of fortresses around him, and I did not allow anyone to come out of the city gates. His towns which I captured I gave to the kings of Ashdod, Ekron, and Gaza. All right, so that's Sennacherib's account of the battle, of the campaign. Now, Sennacherib's account agrees with the biblical account on the point that 46 cities were taken by Sennacherib in Isaiah 36:1. But Sennacherib did not succeed in taking Jerusalem. And notice that Sennacherib never states that he took the city. What he says is, as for Hezekiah the king, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. This is describing the siege of Jerusalem. Hezekiah himself was never captured. Jerusalem was not taken. And three sources all agree that something happened at the siege of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem siege failed. All right, let's go back to the biblical account. As the Assyrians come to Jerusalem, the meeting between the Assyrian and Jewish delegations is brought forward. And the first emphasis is on the Assyrian delegation in verses 1 and 2. Now, this is actually a sequel to Isaiah 7. Remember Isaiah 7? We'll see why it's a sequel to that in just a moment. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem to King Hezekiah with a large army. And he stood, and here's the sequel to Isaiah 7, he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway of the fuller's field. So the delegation comes to Jerusalem while Lachish is being besieged. Now the Rabshakeh is the head of this delegation. This is not his name, this is his title. He's the chief cupbearer, and he's accompanied with a great army for intimidation purposes. Now 2 Kings 18:17 tells us he was accompanied by two other officers, the Tartan and the Rabsaris. These are titles of Assyrian officers. And the place where they all meet is the same place where Ahaz rejected the message of Isaiah and brought on the Assyrian yoke in Isaiah 7:3. Here's Isaiah 7:3. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son Sha'ar-Yashuv, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field. There we go. Somewhere in this area, the son, Hezekiah, must make a similar decision that his father made in the very same place. And here's another picture. This is the city of David, and again, somewhere down in this area, down near the pool of Siloam, somewhere in that area, this is where the delegations met. Now the Jewish delegation is described in verse 3. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder, came out to him. So the Jewish delegation is made up of three men. Eliakim, he's the head of the house. This is in fulfillment of Isaiah 22, verses 20 through 24. He has been promoted in the government to the top position in the government beneath the king. And then Shebna is mentioned. He's described as the scribe. He has been demoted from the office down to one step lower. Eliakim has taken his place. And this is in partial fulfillment of Isaiah 22, 15 through 19 and verse 25. The first stage of the prophecy against Shebna was demotion. He was demoted from the highest position in the government to down one stage, and Eliakim took his place. And then the second stage of his demotion, of his fall, will be exile, and that will come. Yoah is the third man. He's the recorder. We don't know anything about him. The defiance of Rabshakeh comes out in verses 4 through 10. He points out the futility of Judah's confidence. He says that Judah's rebellion is fruitless. Judah doesn't have any power. Verse 4. Then the Rabshakeh said to them, say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what is this confidence that you have? Now Hezekiah is never addressed as king by the Assyrian. He never offers Hezekiah any respect. In contrast, when he talks to the king of Assyria, he'll call him the great king. He'll give a lot of respect to the king of Assyria. And so he states that Hezekiah's talk of war never goes beyond the talking stage. Verse 5. I say, your counsel and strength for the war are only empty words. Now on whom do you rely, that you have rebelled against me? Well, he's telling everybody he considers talk to be cheap. Talk is cheap, Hezekiah. You never come forth to fight. You never come forth in battle. You're just a good talker, but that's as far as it goes. And by the way, Egypt will be no help to you either. In verse 6, you're not any help to yourself, and Egypt's not any help to you either. Behold, you rely on that staff of this crushed reed, even on Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who rely upon him. And so Egypt is no help. It's nothing but a bruised reed, a broken reed. And we've defeated the Egyptians on the plains of El-Tekah. We did them in. So whoever leans on this reed is going to be pierced by it, damaged by it. Egypt is going to do you more harm than good. So the very thing that Isaiah predicted, Egypt will be your shame, is now fulfilled. Now, if the Rabshakeh had stopped talking at this point, he would have said exactly what Isaiah had been saying in chapters 30 and 31. But in his pride and arrogance, he doesn't stop. So at this point, instead he continues making stupid remarks that will be Assyria's downfall. He says in verse 7 that the Lord is no help either. Verse 7. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and has said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? So he says that Hezekiah himself removed God's altars. So how can this God help you? He thinks Hezekiah has offended God. Why would your God help you if you took away his altars? This shows his total lack of understanding, his total lack of knowledge in the nature of the true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish God, versus idols. To him, the abundance of idols meant that God was pleased. There's people worshiping him all over the place. Well, that's not exactly what it means to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the living and true God. He goes on to boast about the superiority of Assyria, and so he makes a wager in verse 8. Now, therefore, come make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses, if you're able on your part to send riders on them. So in a mocking tone, he offers a wager. Let's just make this a fair fight. I'll give you some cavalry. I'll give you some horses to help even out the odds, buddy. I'll provide you with 2,000 horses. I got 2,000 of them in reserve that I can give to you. So we'll supply the equipment. Can Judah provide 2,000 riders? You supply the crews that man the equipment. But the point is, Judah doesn't have enough manpower to withstand Assyria. You are not strong enough. And not only that, Egypt is inferior as well. Verse 9. How then can you repulse one official of the least of my master's servants and rely on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? So the smallest and weakest Assyrian officer can't be turned back even with the help of Egypt. So the point is that Egypt is not strong enough to help you either. In addition, the Lord will aid us. The Lord will aid Assyria. Verse 10. Have I now come up without the Lord's approval against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. It's Judah's own God who brought Assyria to conquer, and that is quite true. That is true. Assyria was indeed commissioned by God in Isaiah 10, verse 5 and 6. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in whose hands is my indignation. I send it, there it is, I send it against the godless nation, against Judah, and commission it against the people of my fury to capture booty and to seize plunder and to trample them down like mud in the streets. So that's quite true. Assyria was commissioned by God to come against Judah, but she went beyond her commission. Isaiah chapter 10. And so it will be that when the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the pomp of his haughtiness. So Assyria was commissioned, but Assyria went beyond her commission, and that is her big error. And so his point is that God cannot help you either. All right, we're just down to about 3 minutes in this particular session. So let's see. And we're at chapter 36, verse 11. Let's go ahead and just begin the next few verses as we look at the issue of diplomatic language. This issue is raised. It's raised at the request of the Jewish delegation in verse 11. Then Eliakim and Shebna and Yoah the Rabshakeh said to the Rabshakeh, speak now to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak with us in Judean, in the hearing of the people who are on the wall. So the Rabshakeh has been speaking Hebrew. That's the common language. He's now requested to speak in Aramaic, which is the diplomatic language. The reason? To avoid creating fear among the people. But the Rabshakeh refuses in verse 12. But Rabshakeh said, has my master sent me only to your master and to you to speak these words, and not to the men who sit on the wall, doomed to eat their own dung and drink their own urine with you? So he was sent by Sennacherib to speak to all the people, and then he uses psychological warfare. He deliberately speaks of the famine conditions that'll come upon the city when it's under siege. Still speaking in Hebrew, he now issues a demand. And the demand is for Jerusalem's surrender in verses 13 through 20. His address is to all the people. Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in Judean and said, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. So he addresses all the people that are all along the wall. And he calls them to distrust Hezekiah and to distrust God. Hezekiah cannot save you, verse 14. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. And that is very, very true. But then he says, the Lord cannot save you either, verse 15. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Well, that is very, very false. And that is the Assyrians' big mistake. That's the big mistake. And as we come to verse 16, we come to a call for submission to Sennacherib. And we're just run out of time. There goes my timer. We're out of time for this session. We'll pick it up next session at verse 16 with this call for submission to Sennacherib, this call to surrender and let the Assyrians take over and destroy the city of Jerusalem. Well, what will happen? Stay tuned. We'll see you next session. Thanks for being our students. Lehi Throd.